In May 1940, Britain stood on the edge of complete catastrophe. Across Europe, Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg strategy had crushed every nation in its path. Poland had fallen in weeks. Denmark and Norway collapsed almost overnight. Now, Hitler's war machine turned west toward France. French commanders trusted the massive Maginot Line, believing it would stop any German invasion. But German panzer divisions smashed through the Ardennes forest, a route the Allies believed tanks could never pass. It was a fatal miscalculation. Within days, German armor burst into open countryside and raced toward the English Channel, slicing straight through Allied defenses and cutting off the British Expeditionary Force, along with large numbers of French and Belgian troops. Nearly 400,000 Allied soldiers were suddenly trapped in northern France. Behind them, German forces closed in relentlessly. In front of them stretched the cold grey waters of the Channel. Their only escape route was the small port town of Dunkirk, a harbour never designed to evacuate an entire army. The soldiers on the ground realized the truth before London did. They were surrounded. What began as an organized retreat quickly turned into a desperate race for survival. Columns of exhausted men marched for days under constant air attack, moving through burning villages and shattered roads. German Stuka dive bombers screamed from the sky, their sirens deliberately designed to spread terror. Explosions ripped through marching columns, trucks burned, horses screamed in pain. Wounded men were left behind because there was no way to carry them. When the troops finally reached Dunkirk, they found a scene from hell. Tens of thousands of men stretched along the beaches in endless lines. The port facilities had been heavily bombed. Fuel dumps burned non-stop, filling the sky with thick black smoke that blotted out the sun. The sea was littered with wreckage from ships destroyed in earlier attacks. Oil floated on the surface of the water, igniting when bombs struck. Every few minutes, German aircraft returned, dropping bombs and strafing the crowded beaches. Shrapnel tore through sand and flesh alike. Men were killed while simply waiting in line. There was little food and almost no fresh water. Many soldiers had not slept for days. Despite the chaos, discipline held. Officers organized columns. Men waited quietly, knowing panic would only make things worse. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill faced the darkest moment of his career. Britain had almost no trained army left at home. If these men were captured, the island would be defenseless against invasion. The Royal Navy calculated it might be able to save only 45,000 soldiers at best. Even that seemed optimistic. Churchill authorized a desperate evacuation plan called Operation Dynamo. It would be run from a tunnel room beneath Dover Castle, where officers marked ship movements on large maps while Luftwaffe bombs fell nearby. Every available destroyer was ordered to cross the channel again and again, under constant attack. But there was a major problem. Dunkirk's harbour was too badly damaged for large warships to dock. Shallow waters prevented destroyers from reaching the beaches. Soldiers had to wade into the sea, sometimes chest deep, to reach small boats that ferried them to larger ships waiting offshore. Many drowned from exhaustion. Others froze in the cold water. Bodies drifted back to shore. The situation seemed hopeless. That was when Britain made a decision that would become legend. Civilian boats were needed. A call went out across southern England asking for any vessel that could cross the channel. Fishing trawlers, pleasure yachts, river ferries, lifeboats, tugboats, private sailboats. Over 800 civilian vessels answered. Some owners volunteered. Others had their boats requisitioned by the Navy. Many skippers had never sailed in open water. Some had no navigation equipment. None had weapons. They sailed anyway. These boats became known as the little ships of Dunkirk. Ordinary men crossed into a war zone to rescue soldiers they had never met. German planes attacked anything that moved. Bombs hit the water around them. Machine guns sprayed decks. Some boats were sunk, others caught fire. Some turned back, but most kept going. They reached the beaches and loaded as many men as possible, far beyond safe capacity. Soldiers sat on decks, clung to railings, packed into cabins. Many were wounded. Some collapsed from dehydration. Civilians gave up their water, their food, even their jackets. Royal Navy destroyers worked without rest. Crews slept only minutes at a time. Ships returned to England, unloaded troops, refueled, and turned around immediately. Some made 4 crossings in a single day. Medical staff treated wounded men on open decks. Oil-covered soldiers collapsed from exhaustion. Many cried when they realized they were going home. Above them, the Royal Air Force fought desperately. Fighter pilots rose again and again to engage German bombers. Dogfights raged high in the sky. Many soldiers on the ground believed the RAF had abandoned them because they could not see the air battles happening far above. Only later did they learn how hard the pilots had fought and how many had died to protect them. Against all expectations, the numbers kept rising. 45,000 evacuated, then 100,000, then 200,000. Each day seemed impossible, and yet it kept happening. By June 4th, 338,226 Allied soldiers had been saved, including over 198,000 British and nearly 140,000 French. It was a miracle of logistics and courage, but the cost was heavy. The Royal Navy lost 6 destroyers. Over 200 vessels were sunk or damaged. Hundreds of sailors died. The RAF lost more than 100 aircraft. French troops formed defensive lines to cover the evacuation, sacrificing themselves so others could escape. Many were captured. Some never returned home. For many soldiers, the journey home was just as emotional as the escape itself. As ships approached the English coast, men crowded the rails, scanning the shoreline in disbelief. Some had prepared themselves mentally for years in prison camps. Others expected death. To see the white cliffs of Dover rising from the mist felt unreal. When they finally disembarked, volunteers handed them tea, sandwiches, and cigarettes. Many soldiers broke down in tears for the first time since the fighting began. Strangers embraced them. Civilians cheered. But beneath the relief was shame. Many felt they had failed, that they had run instead of fought. It would take time for them to understand they had survived something no army had ever escaped before. Back on the beaches of Dunkirk, the final hours were brutal. French troops formed a defensive ring around the evacuation zone, holding back German infantry while the last British units boarded ships. Artillery shells fell among them. Street fighting erupted in the outskirts of the town. When the final boats pulled away, thousands of French soldiers were still fighting, knowing capture was inevitable. They had bought time with their lives. Their sacrifice was essential to the evacuation's success. German forces finally entered Dunkirk on June 5th. They found abandoned vehicles, scattered equipment, and bodies left unburied. Hitler's commanders were furious. An entire enemy army had slipped through their hands. The pause order became one of the most controversial decisions of the war. German officers later admitted it was a strategic disaster. What could have ended Britain's ability to fight instead strengthened its resolve. In Britain, the government quietly faced the truth. The army had escaped, but it had left almost everything behind. Over 2,400 guns, nearly 65,000 vehicles, and tens of thousands of tons of ammunition and fuel were lost. Britain was alive, but badly wounded. Factories went into overdrive, civilians prepared defenses, beaches were fortified, barricades rose in cities, the nation braced for invasion. Yet something had changed forever. Dunkirk proved that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary moments. Fishermen, shopkeepers, teachers, and retirees had sailed into a war zone without hesitation. Their courage became legend. Children learned their names. Their boats were preserved as national treasures. The phrase Dunkirk spirit entered the language, meaning determination in the face of impossible odds. One question still haunts history. Why didn't the Germans finish them? For 2 critical days, Hitler ordered his tank divisions to stop. His generals begged to continue the attack, but Hitler hesitated. Some historians believe he feared the marshy terrain around Dunkirk. Others say he wanted the Luftwaffe to destroy the trapped army from the air. Hermann Göring promised air power could finish the job. He was wrong. That pause saved Britain. Churchill refused to call Dunkirk a victory. He stood in Parliament and warned, "We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations." Yet something powerful had happened. The army was saved. The nation was united. Ordinary civilians had crossed into hell to rescue strangers. Morale soared. Britain was no longer afraid. Within weeks, France would fall. Britain would stand alone against Nazi Germany. Invasion seemed inevitable. Then Churchill delivered words that defined a generation. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender." Dunkirk became more than an evacuation. It became a symbol, not of triumph, but of survival, not of victory, but of defiance. Years later, survivors returned to those beaches. They walked the sand where they once waited for death. Some found rusted metal. Others stood silently, remembering fallen friends. Dunkirk never left them. It shaped how they lived, how they faced fear, and how they understood survival. The men saved at Dunkirk would fight again in North Africa, Italy, and Normandy. They carried the memory of those beaches for the rest of their lives. For them, Dunkirk was not a miracle. It was terror, fire, death, and waiting. But it was also hope. Because they lived. And because they lived, Britain lived.